Welcome to Lead and Follow, a podcast that explores how great collaboration actually happens. I'm your host, Sharna Fabiano, author of the book Lead and Follow, The Dance of Inspired Teamwork. And I'm pleased to bring you the latest research, insights, and learning methods to help you work together better with the people around you. I help founders, solopreneurs, and new leaders become great at collaborating because I've seen how much more becomes possible when people integrate their ideas, perspectives, and strengths in a practical way. To learn more about coaching with me and for a one-time discount on your first session, go to sharnafabiano.com/coaching and enter the promo code podcast. The link is in the show notes. And now, here's the episode. Hi, everyone. This is Sharna. This episode is going to be a little different than the others, in part because I'm going to give you an extended introduction. I know I'm not alone in my growing concern over the phenomenon of digital addiction, the very real ways our attention is being challenged every day, and the very noticeable effects of all of that on our social skills, on the quality of our relationships, and on the literal amount of time we spend together in the flesh with other people. So what does all this do to our sense of safety, belonging, trust, and also the ability that we have to live in the same reality and therefore co-create that reality together? Isolation is a real risk to our health and to our ability to problem solve, and of course to our ability to lead and follow each other, to collaborate, to think and dream together. And so this relational dance, it isn't just nice to have, it's actually necessary. So I wanted to talk with someone who I feel is holding a kind of antidote to this situation we're in, and who, in the way that he lives every day, embodies a kind of relational resilience or maybe relational imagination that really inspires me and that I find myself craving, not in the way that I might obsessively and mindlessly check my email, but in a more bone deep, visceral way. The way I crave connection in my life. So my guest today is my longtime friend, the actor-director Dan Istrate. If you've been listening for a while, you may remember Dan from season 1, where he shared his perspective on the magic of leading and following in live performance. I encourage you to go back and listen to that episode, and I'll link it in the show notes. But for this conversation, I really wanted to talk with Dan about how he interacts with people socially. Because when I'm with him, I feel more present. And I don't think it's just me, and I don't think it's only because of his acting training, though that may be part of it. Dan grew up in Romania and has lived for the past 25 years in the United States. He's had thousands of both painful and hilarious experiences of language and culture translation and mistranslation, working on both stage and screen in a wide variety of creative collaborations. And socially, his way of being seems to invite other people to be more open, more brave, more playful, and more free. It's something that's hard to describe in words, but we're going to give it a try today because it's an area of leading and following that we experience every single day. And I think it just might transform how you see simple conversations all around you, with friends, at home, with strangers, and even maybe especially on dates. If you're someone who feels at all anxious about talking to people, or like me, feels that they're still recovering from the pandemic, this episode might be especially helpful. So let's get started. Dan, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much, Sharna. That was a beautiful introduction. It's funny because I think of myself as a shy person first, as an introvert. But you mentioned, you said, you got to kind of have to be brave in these conversations, because I know sometimes people close off when I come too strong towards them with being right now, right here, and there's no veil or anything. And a lot of times people are not ready for that. But it's the only way I know how to be, really. And that has to do with what you mentioned, the fact that I lived half of my life in Romania and half of my life here. You are thrown into a set of circumstances in which you cannot doubt yourself anymore. You kind of have to survive. I used to be afraid just to go and to go to the grocery store and have an interaction there just by paying, or I would hope that, oh my God, I hope that she's not going to ask me too many questions, Any thought of like being perfect or speaking amazingly well, it just goes out the window. You're just trying to survive. And there is a freedom in that.
I would actually love to start by asking you about freedom, because it's something I've heard you speak about a lot, both in the context of performance, but also just in the way that you strive to be in your everyday life with other people that you meet. So could you say a little more about what freedom means for you?
If you think about the fact that you cannot really influence the way people perceive you, they will perceive you in a completely different way than you think they perceive you. In that idea, to me, I find freedom, because that gives me the freedom to just be, because I know I have this knowledge. That's my belief. So I know that, hey, they will perceive me in their own way, no matter what. So I might as well present my own truth in this moment and be as sincere as I can be. And in doing so, you are going to be a lot of different things. You're going to be brilliant and you're going to be an idiot in the next moment, or whatever. Or that's in your mind. But in the moment when you thought you were being an idiot, maybe, let's say, I mean, it's an extreme. Maybe that's the moment when you really have an impact, or you had you influence the person in a very positive way.
I do want to pick up on what you're saying here, because I think in large part, it's the exact opposite of what mainstream culture, and especially social media culture, trains us to do. What I mean is that digital life writ large tends to encourage us to be overly concerned with and to try to control what other people think about us. And here you're saying actually the secret is the opposite of that. It's deliberately not trying to control what others think of you that brings the feeling of freedom. And just to make sure we don't slide into a cliche here and just say, oh, we don't care what other people think, I want to be clear that there is a part of us that does very much care, and that should. That's normal and natural. We as humans need to be accepted, and we need to know that we belong to the human family in a larger sense. But this is different. I think what you're talking about is more of a nuanced thing. It's how am I going to be perceived by the other person in this or that specific context, and trying to make sure they see me as smart or successful or whatever it may be. And I feel like that effort is so habituated in us and maybe reinforced by the social media phenomenon or even just business culture in general. So you get used to putting on a persona all the time. And my sense in talking with people is that this can start to feel stressful and really effortful. So I think what you're suggesting is like the opposite of that. I don't control how people see me. I can't control it. I may somehow influence it, but even that influence isn't totally under my control. So I may as well, and here's where I'm intrigued. I may as well, what? Finish that sentence for me.
I may as well be, as you said earlier, present. Because I wanted to say, be myself, be free. Yeah, all that is true, but be present, because here's the thing. What you are perceiving as being yourself changes every moment. Not radically. Of course, it's still me. It's still, I still have the same beliefs, more or less. But every moment, this is an interesting idea that really goes against all the social media paradigm. It's so futile, everything that we're trying to do and to present on Instagram or whatever you use. Because you're trying to constantly say that this is who I am. this is who I am. This is who I am. You're trying to freeze this image of yourself. Whereas reality is that the second you take a photo, the second you take a picture, the next second, that picture is not true anymore, because that moment is gone. So, especially as actors, we go like, oh, this looks like me. No, it doesn't anymore. It's gone. The second you take the picture, the second you take the money shot, that is not real already. So the way I try to behave is to accept that some people would say tragic truth, but I say that miraculous truth, that every moment is fleeting. It's just gone. And you don't have that chance to be present. So you might as well take it with each moment. But in doing so, you take a chance. You're constantly vulnerable. You take a chance, and another chance, and another chance, and another chance. And that's where the beauty is.
Don, I really love how you're describing this way of being. And I want to acknowledge that it is a tricky thing to describe because it's a bit of a paradox. I want to point out for listeners that the fixed versus fluid contrast that you were applying to self-identity here is the same one that we have used before on the podcast to explain leading and following in the workplace. In other words, you can have a fixed position in a company, and at the same time, you can shift fluidly between leading and following roles, depending on what meeting you're in, what project you're on, etc. So I love that you're using this same idea for social interactions. I'm always me, Sharna, with my particular set of life experiences, right? That's the fixed part of my identity. But I'm still fluid with how I can show up in the world from conversation to conversation. I can express different aspects of my personality at different times. I can be funny and I can be serious. I can be silly and I can be magical. And I think that paradox of identity is really powerful because I find that when I do accept the miraculous truth, as you call it, that the moment is gone, we're in the now, that I don't have control over what people think, then when I'm in that state, people actually tend to experience me, as more authentic, more connected, more real. And that can be quite surprising. I also think there's a kind of mirror neuron effect that happens when you are with someone who's operating in this fixed yet fluid way. And this is something I experience with you, Don. You get a kind of intuitive hit of what the state feels like from the other person. So then it's easier for you yourself to step into it. And I just want to say for listeners, it feels good. It feels really good. We're using words like free or present, but I want to also just say it's a very good feeling state to be in. And I always feel that with you, Don, and I always remember it and take it with me.
I think it's our natural state. It's something to learn from, if you want to put it this way, from animals. There's that saying that when a vulture picks up a chicken, and the chicken thinks in that moment, okay, I'm going to die. But the second the vulture drops the chicken goes about its life and just, as if nothing happened. Like there is no memory of the past. And while you were talking, I was thinking about the only way to get out of the burden of history is to get out of history into that moment. And the only way out of history is the present moment. Pure. Because all these things, all this idea of me trying to control the way people perceive me is anchored in my perception of my past. Because my perception of myself has to do with my past, because that's all I know. or with what I'm trying to become in the future, what I'm trying to, what I'm going towards, right? So then I have this image of myself that is not true. Sorry, but I'm telling you, it's not true. So all you have is this moment, and I know this is such a cliche, and people talk a lot nowadays about it being in a moment and the power of now and all that. But we're missing that point. We're missing the point. So being in this moment right now, that's why it feels so good, because it is freeing. It's freeing. And then you allow the other person in front of you or the other people in front of you to be free.
I often use the example of a good conversation as a way to explain intuitive lead and follow rules. I wonder if you feel like you are leading or following or both when you have a good conversation with someone, or if you would even describe it in that way or in some totally different way.
It happens organically. The roles just spontaneously reverse. And that's what I think that's the best conversation that you can have with someone, in which you lead and you can lead for forever. I mean, you can think about the type of conversation in which you are just saying three words, or not even three words, three sounds in an hour conversation. And that's still an amazing conversation. And maybe it seems like you followed because someone just had a monologue of an hour. But what if you were leading? What if you were opening doors and that person was just going through the door, and you open another door just by saying, yeah, totally. And you open another door and that person follows through the door, even though from outside it seems like that person is leading. To me, it doesn't really matter at all. What you said earlier, that pleasant sensation, that pleasant feeling is the thing. So that's the North Star for me, so to speak. That's what I'm looking for.
I'm so glad you brought up the example of one person speaking for a long time while the other person listens for a long time. In social dance, we often say that the leader opens the space and the follower steps into the space. So I love the door metaphor and the fact that the listener can actually be the leader of the conversation, the one holding the door open. It's actually something I remember a lot from my experience in rehearsal processes, where the performer is the follower. You are doing, you're moving, you're exploring the space, you're exploring the scene, and the director is the leader. But often that person doesn't speak very much. They just point to the left, they just make a gesture, or they say very few words, or they just say again. And it's so minimal, yet their awareness and their focus on you is so strong that you know they're holding that door open for you.
I like that idea a lot in a lot of aspects of life. Open the door and someone passes through and they enter the room as far as they want to go. So you just create the space. And I think your role is to make that room as welcoming as possible, so the other person can feel as comfortable as they can. So then they can really open up and let you in their world, in their room, to use this. We can go, to infinity with this metaphor.
Yes, beautiful. And I think it's something you do exceptionally well. And you maybe have been doing it for so long that it's second nature to you. I'd like to mention a typical complaint. I hear a lot about this same situation where one person is speaking a lot and the other person is listening a lot. The complaint usually goes something like this. You're on a bad date or you're cornered by a stranger at a party, and the person giving the monologue is imposing themselves, maybe out of nervousness or the desire to impress you or fill up the time or whatever. The end result is that instead of feeling entertained or delighted, you feel invisible or trapped. And that is clearly not what we're talking about here by opening up the doors. This is more like a case where the listener is probably in the follower role, not the leader role. And they're probably not really comfortable there because something isn't right with the interaction. So here's a practical tip I'll throw out for listeners. Steal the lead. Steal the lead is a phrase that we use in social dance for switching roles from follower to leader in the middle of a dance. It's not quite as aggressive as it sounds. It's more like having really good timing and redirecting the flow of energy. So you start by paying close attention to what your partner is saying and listen for a detail that sounds even a little bit interesting. Look for a pause or a breath, and then open another door quickly by asking about that detail. You can also use a micro pause to change the subject by saying something like, "Oh, that reminds me of," and then ask a question about the new subject. As long as you do this in the spirit of playfulness and with a genuine desire to connect, your steal will probably feel good, and you'll now be leading so you can direct the conversation in a way that's more fun. Don, I know this is going to sound really broad, but I'm just curious if you have any other observations about following and leading in life, with other people, in relationships, just generally as they have played out in your own life.
If I think about my life up to this point, I think I always approached it from a first following role. And maybe this has to do with the fact that I was born in a small village in Romania, and I always wanted to go to a bigger town, a bigger city. Then I wanted to go out of the country. I wanted to see the whole world. So I went from a very small environment to making the world my home. So then, because of that, you constantly had to learn. You constantly have to pay attention. And maybe it has to do with me having a lot of inferiority complexes, right? So I had to follow and I had to listen, right? But here's the thing. At the same time, the common denominator of all these following experiences remained me, myself. Myself, in a way, was the leading magnet that was pulling me through all these experiences. But in the moment by moment, I had to follow that person, this new idea, this new philosophy, this teacher, that friend, that girlfriend, this lover. Do you understand? You always follow someone. And I'm saying this with a sense of gratefulness. You know, I'm being grateful for all those experiences. But it was me. So in a way, I don't know, without sounding too, pretentious, you are the leader of your destiny, but you're following everyone you meet along the way.
I think that's really beautiful. Thank you. And I do think we all might be a little happier if we were comfortable following each other more. So I wonder now how we can move in that direction on a day-to-day basis. Let me ask about this in a very indirect way. What's your number one suggestion for having a positive experience when meeting new people?
You put your entire attention on that person. And all of a sudden now there's less pressure on yourself. And that's a good rule that I follow when I go in social situations, any kind of social situation. Because you have to remember, everybody's thinking about themselves. And I'm not saying this as a criticism of human nature. That's just a fact. Everybody's thinking about themselves. So then allow them to be themselves, to think about themselves. Open the door, create the space. Pay attention to them. That's a big one. You go there, pay attention to that person. If they allow you to be yourself by asking questions or by inviting you to talk, then there you go. Now the stage is yours. Also, If you think you have to perform, to impress someone, then do it, but do it with this in mind. Perform for your ideal audience. This is another acting tip. Always perform for your ideal audience. And don't worry about anything else. Your ideal audience will react exactly the way you want them to react. So if they don't react like that, that means that they are not your ideal audience. So it's not your problem.
One thing I hear a lot of concern about is this phenomenon of the awkward silence. So I wonder what your take on this is and how you might suggest folks navigate these moments in conversation.
Sometimes the awkward silence, it can be hellish, and sometimes it can be of heavenly nature. In Chekhov, he says that when people remain silent, in one of his plays, he says, an angel just flew by. And we are so programmed in modern world and in a Western world to be able to be on all the time and witty and conversation, the wittier you are. And here's the thing, conversation shouldn't be that. So sometimes silences are beautiful. They contain a very uncomfortable moment, but then the next moment can be bliss if both people accept it.
Okay, tell me if I'm getting this right, but I think I just realized while listening to you that when I said earlier, awkward silence, that was almost a biased statement. So I'm already predetermining what it is just by calling it that. And what you're making me aware of now is that it's just a silence. We can label it awkward or we can label it blissful. And it's actually in the moment that we are creating the feeling of awkwardness by thinking that a silence is somehow wrong or bad.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say. It could be awkward, but a lot of times it could be blissful. It could be that that's the moment we actually connect. You don't have to ask me, so do you come here often? Where are you from? Are you from San Diego or not? Or, it's like, you don't have to say any of that. Because sometimes the conversation, the words, makes it even more awkward. We are getting closer to being in sync vibrationally. And then we say something because there was an awkward silence. But the awkward silence, most of the times, in my opinion, leads to vibrational coherence. This is what I think people are missing in conversations. They think that the words are the thing, but the thing is the vibration.
I love that you pointed out that words can be just as awkward as silence, or even more awkward even. So we're really kind of missing the point if we just focus on the words, especially if we want to understand a leading following dynamic in social interactions. It's not always the speaker who's the leader, and it's not always the listener who's the follower. It's much more about what's happening vibrationally, somatically, and whether that aspect of our being is in sync with the other person or not. I know I've heard this academic statistic thrown out a lot that over 80% of communication is nonverbal. But if you really take that seriously, it's going to change everything you do.
It changes the way you approach a conversation. The words are just, the tip of the iceberg. So then you start paying attention at the body of the iceberg.
Yeah. And here's a kind of related complaint that I hear from folks, which is that conversations are, quote, superficial. And now I'm kind of suspicious of my own labeling of this based on the silence, the awkward silence thing. What if we really, again, take seriously, it's not about the words, or it's only like 10 or 15% about the words. So what does it mean for people to complain that the conversation is superficial, right? Is that really about the words, or is it maybe about the nonverbals that are going on, or the quality of attention there? Or what would you say to someone who's like, well, I go on all these dates and it's just, superficial stuff, and I just, tell people what I do all the time. What would you say to that?
I think what's happening is that people don't actually connect vibrationally. And then, yes, the conversation feels superficial. I'm realizing this as I'm talking right now. The conversation will always be superficial. It's always on the surface. But the conversation can feel better if it is anchored in the depths of our being. And then if we connect on the profound level, then the conversation has the resonance of what we truly feel inside. And that's when the conversation is not, quote unquote, superficial. This conversation is superficial when it is empty of our profound truths, which are usually chaotic, messy. It's when we are vulnerable, and that's usually chaotic. If it's anchored in that, then the conversation can be amazing.
This makes a lot of sense to me in the context of something called congruence, which I've been studying for a while because it's an important thing to track in the coaching process and in personal development in general. In case that's a new term for listeners, a very brief definition of congruence is when your words, feelings, and actions all have the same tone, quality, or energy pattern. Incongruence is when they don't. An everyday example of this is when you're feeling angry at your partner, but you say, "I'm fine," and then you stomp out of the room. The partner is going to feel your incongruence. There's a big gap between the feeling state in your body and the words that you're saying. And so that can be even worse for them than if you had just expressed your anger and said something congruent, like, "I'm angry because you didn't do the dishes," or whatever it might be. It's the incongruence, the mismatch, that feels really grating on our nervous system. So having said that, Don, would you agree that if I had two separate conversations about the same thing, so using the same words essentially, but with two different people, one of the conversations could feel totally superficial or disconnected or fake, while the other one could feel profoundly connected and meaningful and deep? And the difference is what you're calling being anchored into the essence of who we are, the internal chaos of human vulnerability, or maybe, to use my term here, depending on how congruent we are able to be in that conversation.
100%. That's just another way of saying it. Yes, that's exactly what it is. You can have a conversation about plants or, about food. People talk about food, and sometimes it's really a turn off. But sometimes it's not, because you're not really talking about food. You're talking about you're talking about the alchemy of life, maybe, as you talk about food. You're talking about transforming something into something nourishing or whatever. You know what I mean? Even though you use the same words, you prefer parsnip or parsley root? I prefer parsley root. Why is that? So now we're talking about, but I'm being honest, like I'm going deep into my being, even though I'm talking about parsley root. Or, I talk about bread because I like bread. So for most people, if they don't know me right now, if they listen for the first time, they go like, "What are you talking about? That's like, and you eat bread." But wait a second, just stop here and let's go deep. What kind of bread do you eat? What does it do to you? I didn't have bread growing up. I never had enough food. So now I'm exposing myself. I'm putting myself out there I'm making myself very vulnerable. And then I allow you to be vulnerable. And all of a sudden we descend towards the depth of our being. But we're just talking about bread. So I think that's what we're talking about here.
It's so beautiful how you describe these things. I love the iceberg image, and I think it's such a useful metaphor for this purpose. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to share with listeners here at the end as we close? Maybe especially for anyone who feels social anxiety or is still rebuilding their social life after the pandemic, or even just for folks like me who work remotely and spend a lot of time alone?
I would say this. Everyone is unique. And everyone is beautiful. Truly. I truly believe that.
and everyone has something to contribute to this mystery that we call life. It's that simple. If you accept that, you have to take that responsibility on yourself. So there's, it's not just, I'm amazing, but then you have to accept to take that responsibility as well, and to show up in a certain situations, in social situations, and you're going to be a little bit afraid or whatnot, but just show up. It's like, I made a decision a couple of years back after we moved to LA, and we've been here for a while, and I was telling my wife, and I said, every time when you say we're going to go to this party, and my first reaction is, oh man, I don't know anybody, I don't want to go there, it's going to be awkward. I made the decision one day, me, Dan, and I said, every time when I find myself about to react like that, I'm going to do the opposite, and I'm going to say, we're going to go. So I would just show up. And then if the only thing that I could do was the most conventional thing, just small talk, and it feels fake or whatever, just do that. Start there. And just say hello. Just say, how are you? The most conventional thing that you can say. And what I realize is that it's not about the words. If your vibration is good and honest and is anchored in love, as cliche as that sounds, you will be surprised by the end of that party. You might have an amazing time, or at least not so awkward of a time. And this comes from someone who had all the complexes that a person can have. I mean, think about this. And just to reinforce that, I am a person who moved from Romania to the United States when I was 24, when you're pretty much a formed young adult. I moved to a different country, completely different culture, and I pursued what? Acting in a different language. Like, that's like the worst thing that you can, like, from a strategic point of view. Like, if you think about life logically, like, that's the worst thing that you can do. Even being a dancer, it's an easier thing because you don't have to deal with the language. But what did I choose? I choose something that is so difficult even for an American to pursue. I chose something that is so difficult that deals with language. And you're reminded constantly that you have an accent. So you're reminded constantly of your own inadequacy. Even though maybe you are past that, you're like somehow you got over it. And then you go to the grocery store. Today, I'm going to go to the grocery store across the parking lot. Now I'm going to say, how much does this cost? And the person is going to be like, where are you from? That's all I say. Or sometimes I say, hi, how are you? People go like, where are you from? Think about what that does when 7 days a week, every day, you're asked at least once a day that question. Not with ill intent. People want to make conversation. Everything I'm saying comes from someone who has all the who had all the complexes, and I'm still dealing with all these things for the rest of my life. But I find it fascinating, and I find, any connection, awkward or not, any silence, awkward or not, as an amazing opportunity to connect, which is the most beautiful thing in the world that you can experience in this life, to connect with another human being.
Thank you so much, Don, for connecting with me and for sharing these beautiful thoughts on connection. I always learn so much from you on many levels, and as always, I look forward to our next conversation. You have been listening to the Lead and Follow podcast. Special thanks to Glover Gill for composing our music, and a huge thank you to all of you who support the show. It really means a lot. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or consider joining the Lead and Follow fan club for as little as $3 a month. There's a link at the bottom of the show notes.